Hello again. Steve Flanders again with 15 Minutes to Save America. This is episode 8. Last time we talked about Franklin Roosevelt running a fascist coup in the 1930s. The worst aspect of Roosevelt's betrayal, something that's really hidden to our minds and nobody's much thought of, is Social Security. Unbeknownst to us, because nobody's remarked on it, because the press didn't really look too close at it, Social Security has been a major force in a nationwide attack on our culture, our communities, and our families. Essentially, Social Security is an addictive, corrosive social poison that contains the seeds of its own destruction. So we ought to really give some thought to phasing it out. And I know that's the third rail of American politics. Oh, don't talk about that. Well, I'm on Social Security. And I still think it would be a good thing to do because it has such a detrimental effect on us, not just the finances, which I'll get to, but far more importantly, the cultural detrimental effects. It's a corrosive, addictive social poison. And like I say, even though I am on Social Security, I figure we can phase it out. There would be a compassionate way to phase it out, wind it down, making sure everybody that's dependent on it still manages to live. I'd kind of appreciate that. But if we get rid of it, we'll find that it greatly improves our culture. The best way to start talking about that is to consider what life was like before Social Security. Going back to the mists of prehistory, people had big families. And not only did they have big families thinking one or two of the kids might turn out good, help the others get on their feet, and provide the old age care that the elderly need. Everybody at all times has always tried to save money for their own old age. But financial, upheaval, medical costs, all kinds of things can make it to where in your declining years, you're really broke and you need some help. And generally, the best old age insurance was your own children, which is why people had large families, and more importantly, why they took a whole lot more care in developing the moral character of their children. Okay? Since the advent of Social Security, there's no need for the individual to maintain a family or even community relationships. The only relationship you have to maintain lifetime is with the federal government. So in that way, Social Security removes the vested interest that parents have in the character of their children. That is what acts as a corrosive poison on the molecular level of society, breaking up the nuclear family, the basic building block of society, weakening those bonds between children, and why it's a corrosive poison. And it's addictive because once we're going on it, everybody's paying into it, everybody becomes used to it. They're not saving from their own old age, and they're not taking the interest and building the character. Now, that's not to say people have to raise lousy children because of Social Security, but it's kind of like pushing something with a string. You don't force people to take no care for their children, but with Social Security in the future, it allows it. Think about the first generation that had Social Security in their future. 1935 is when this started, okay? And the kids, growing up then, my mother was 7 years old. So that was one of the first things she ever knew of. And children that age, they didn't win World War II, but they grew up with Social Security in their future. And then when they started having children of their own in the late 40s and into the 50s, the idea of being indulgent parents, Dr. Spock was the name of the guy that sold it, and that is kind of confusing because we're not talking about Mr. Spock, Dr. Spock, who was very famous in the 1950s and early 60s because he was preaching a radical doctrine of allow children to raise themselves, okay? And that became popular. amongst the generation that first had Social Security in their future. The other thing that, once again, it was a phenomenon mentioned a lot in the early 60s, was called the generation gap. All of a sudden, along about 1965, 1966, it became clear that the young were a completely divergent culture from their parents, and nobody could figure out why. And more importantly, there wasn't a real passionate move to try and alleviate the problem. It was like, well, good enough. The philosophy was always, the kid is here. He may be a pain in the butt while he's growing up. Maybe I enjoy his company, but once he's 18, he's out of here. And how he lives his life is really no concern of mine. Maybe I have some residual affection, and maybe some families carried on with some of the older type of discipline, but as society as a whole moved in the direction of indulgence and separation of the generations, there arose a kind of social wind of peer pressure, making it to where even parents that wanted to be more strict with their children and see to their character development, not only were seen as a little bit odd, but over time it's gotten to where it's illegal. An awful lot of things that people used to do to keep their kids in line is illegal. Corporal punishment being high on that list is now considered, for the most part, abuse. And so that's a lot of what happened with Social Security and why it is so detrimental culturally. The other aspect of Social Security is that it's destined to go broke. It is a Ponzi scheme. People are not receiving the benefits that they paid in. They're paying in today, and the people that are receiving it are receiving from the money being paid in today, that, because they were part of the Ponzi scheme, And the problem with Ponzi schemes is the only way they really work is if the base remains large, so that the people at the top are smaller in number than the people at the bottom, so that everybody at the bottom pays in and it works its way up, and the people at the top get paid. Well, because of Social Security, people stopped having big families, which also accounts for why there's such a dearth of birth in the Western civilization. Almost all the countries have Social Security. You do away with Social Security, you'll find the desire to have larger families almost immediately come back, okay? But where we're at with Social Security, the demographics no longer look like a pyramid, it looks like a top-heavy column. And so it's slowly going broke. They're already talking about, 2030, they're going to have to reduce benefits and or raise the retirement age. And that probably won't even be enough. And I hope they don't reduce the benefits too much. But if they do, I'd rather we just figured out a way to phase it out, no longer have that burden on the young. Let the people that are on it have, be paid out of the general fund for as long as they live, have much more community-based care. Take this burden off the young, but more important, take this cancer, this corrosive poison out of our culture, and allow us to have healthy families again. And it's like, why can't we see that? But it is absolutely at the root of a lot of what's gone wrong in our society, and goes hand in glove with a lot of the rest of the federal socialistic programs. There's so many things that have come up. I've recently read some Thomas Sowell, and the original reason that the federal government got involved with welfare was to try and wean people off dependence. Yeah, how's that working out? Because it's gotten way worse. And a lot of federal programs are like that. But when we get into these federal programs, we're no longer looking for community solutions. And without community solutions, without focusing on community, that sense of community declines. We no longer look to community for our solutions. Okay, that sense of community declines, that sense of morality that grew up through the families and into the community, and that sense of us being in our community together and working to fix things, and that sense of morality that grew with that declines. So then there ends up being more problems. And another federal program gets proposed and carried out. And community gets weaker. The general sense of morals declines further. More problems develop, It's a downward spiral, and we've been on it for the longest time. This is a theme I'm going to hit on more because I think we haven't even really thought about how much the form of government affects us morally and culturally. And I think that's the biggest problem with it, is we've just lost sight of our place in a living nation, and instead to see ourselves as consuming, producing units, just materialistic units. And we need to not be that way. So, to sum up this one and, give a tease for the next, you had the press getting controlled by the rich, and corporate personhood came along and started decimating our economy and centralizing all that power. The only solution seemed to be more federal power during the progressive era. When that failed, the only solution seemed like more federal power with FDR, which increased a whole lot under Lyndon Johnson in the 60s. And, you had corporate personhood, the federal elite, socialism coming around our ears, Social Security, all of these destructive forces running amok on the landscape, decimating our communities, decimating our families. And I think it got worse. Next time I'm going to start talking about the First Amendment and wrapping it all up with talking about local community moral self-government, how it could and should work, how much of a blessing it was because of how much better people it causes us to be. And that's what's lost. That's what we've lost. And that's what was so wonderful about America, is who it caused us to be. I'm reminded of a movie, The Accidental Tourist. And the star has a line toward the end talking about being in love. And he says it's not so much that I like her more than I like you, talking to his ex-wife. It's I like who I become around her. And that's why people loved liberty, because they liked who they became when they were truly free and self-governing. And that's what I'm going to go into the next time, and more. Thank you. Be sure and share and follow. Once again, the blog site is lifeinafascistcountry.blogspot.com. If you want to read ahead and see where this is going, and if you're really getting interested now, go to the first listed one there. Here, let me see if I can point to it. That one. lifeinafascistcountry.blogspot.com with the 202502. But how and why to save America. To review and get quite a bit more in depth on Social Security, go to that same website with the same prefix, but 2025, /2025/social-security.html. It's all lowercase. I just don't print very clearly in lowercase. And here we go. Once again, to review real quickly. Sorry about that. I'm being sloppy today. Telegraph was invented, got press control in the hands of the rich, corporate personhood, which ran roughshod over us. The 16th and 17th Amendment. 18th got done. Government by experts. FDR ran his little fascist coup and, talked about fascism and what it amounts to. And now we looked at Social Security. Next time we're going to start going to 1947, when the First Amendment was twisted out of all recognition. The loss of local community moral self-government, which I mentioned just a little bit today, and the lost blessings of liberty, and how we can reform and refound our nation to recover that, and how the key to getting all that done is to establish a true public forum. Talk to y'all later. Be sure and follow and share, especially share. I'm going to talk about that next time.